This presentation will just give you an introduction to what is leadership. Before defining it, let's just ask a question: why do we need to talk about it? And on the screen you can see 4 examples of where leadership has been identified as an issue contributing to failings in the care for patients. Alder Hey was around the retention of children's body parts, and through the inquiry they appointed the pathologist knowing the risks. There was no follow-up, monitor or review of complaints. There was no leadership around and management of the situation. Bristol Royal Infirmary, with high infant mortality rates following cardiac surgery, was clearly identified as a failure in leadership at that time. Mid Staffordshire NHS Foundation Trust is fairly well publicly reported in terms of the failings at that hospital trust, whilst it applied to become a foundation trust, saw a cutting of costs and a reduction in staff having an impact on care. And finally, and more recently, there's the Furness Hospital in Morecambe Bay, where the inquiry found lethal, shocking, unacceptable, dysfunctional failures at every level of terms used in that inquiry into maternity care at the hospital. So the Francis report came out of the Mid Staffordshire inquiries, both the independent inquiry in 2010 and the public inquiry in 2013, recognised the need for an improved understanding of leadership. Don Berwick from Institute of Healthcare Improvement in America was engaged by David Cameron, the Prime Minister at that time, to understand how we can make zero-sum harm a reality, and identified 10 recommendations to help reduce harm within our hospital systems, of which leadership is one component of that. All I would do at this point is just highlight and have some concerns about seeing the achievement of quality as just some simple 10-step guide. I think it's a lot more complicated than that, but nevertheless the intentions are helpful and positive. In terms of defining leadership, there are no shortage of different definitions, but what the literature also highlights is that there is no consensus, or as it's a straightforward answer to defining what leadership is. I'm interested in the Zuccaro description on the slide, because for me it talks to the way we consider leadership and pass the stories, legends and fables of our own experiences of leadership on. And through their work they identified 4 memes: leader as warrior, leader as problem solver, leader as politician, and leader as teacher. And within each of those there are descriptions as to the types of leadership. And I should say that the term meme isn't in the current cultural appropriation of the term, but actually draws from Richard Dawkins' use of the term, meaning modelled on genes or to imitate, is the definition of meme used here. So defining leadership is not straightforward. As I've said, there is still significant quantities of leadership, so let's have a look at what is consistent between them that might help us understand what leadership is. From perspectives, there are 3 different ways of which leadership is often presented. One is the leader-centric, so defining the individual characters, the charismatic nature of the leader. The second way of thinking about leadership is actually defining the leader by the relationship with those people that follow. So the notion is a leader can't lead without followers, so it's around understanding that mutually dependent relationship. The third component sees the leader operating in a much more complex environment of relationships, not just a hierarchical sense of leader and subordinates, but the much more matrix and complex organisation systems that we work in. Across all of those, the common themes that come out in terms of leadership, it's around having vision, generating trust, being an expert communicator, and creative in terms of building opportunities and solving problems. But for me, what this literature identifies is that what leadership is very much a personal construct. It's something that we generate through our understanding and our experiences. And that point is echoed by Northouse here. Maybe we can help in terms of our definition by understanding what it's not, and that leads us on to the question of what's the difference between leadership and management. And leadership certainly has been discussed for a long time, whereas management is a relatively new construct, one that developed in the early 20th century as the growth of the industrialised nations continued, and organisation and management was a fundamental part of that. But of course I'll struggle to understand the difference between the two if we can't agree on a consistent definition of leadership. But again, from the literature we can look at some broad ideas of what those differences are. In a leadership text from Barr and Dowding in 2016, they've set out these two broad differentiating characteristics of both leadership and management. And you can see from this is the concept of leadership is much more around influencing. It's often achieved through position. It's around developing and delivering on vision, whereas management is based on positional responsibility. It's around achieving detailed delivery. In reality, this differentiation isn't as clear and as stark as it seems, and therefore we will find people in roles that undertake both leadership and management functions at the same time. There's overlap between the two of them. But this does give a reasonable overview of the two components, and for me the important step is to be clear about what you want to achieve. How you get there and with whom is then part of how you want to deliver your quality improvement, and which approach you take, be that leadership or management, is then absolutely focused on the outcome that you want to achieve. For a more detailed overview of a leadership model, I'm going to refer to the NHS Leadership Academy's model for leadership in the NHS, in which it sets out 9 behaviours or 9 dimensions of healthcare leadership, which draw from the leader-centric perspective and picks up some of those common themes that we've spoken about already. And the dimensions are leading with care, sharing the vision, influencing for results, engaging the team, evaluating information, inspiring shared purpose, holding to account, developing capability, and connecting our service. The framework provides a behaviour-centric approach, so focusing on the qualities of what they consider to make a good leader and the relationship between those different dimensions. This has been a very brief introduction to the field of leadership. We can see that there is a great deal written on the subject, but sadly this doesn't convert into absolute clarity. So this module will help you to find a practical way through all of this literature.